All right, so a couple of days ago, we got an absolutely massive leaked trove of documents on the internal workings of Uber, which basically just exposed what I think a lot of us already understood to be the case, that Uber is essentially just a gigantic fraud operation whose entire business model relies on rampant exploitation of their workers, along with lobbying and bribing of government officials, and also straight up lying to police and investigators and regulators in dozens of countries around the world. So from The Guardian here, we have a massive breakdown on some of the first information we're getting from these documents. This was a huge project that was done with like dozens of different journalistic outlets around the world, so I'm sure we're going to be getting more details and information. But here to start us off from The Guardian, they say a leaked trove of confidential files has revealed the inside story of how the tech giant Uber flouted laws, duped police, exploited violence against drivers, and secretly lobbied governments during its aggressive global expansion. And really, as you're going to see in this breakdown, I mean, one of the craziest aspects of this is how Uber executives themselves describe their business model, basically just coming out and admitting that they understand they're engaging in rampantly illegal behavior. But they continue here saying the unprecedented leak to The Guardian of more than 124,000 documents known as the Uber files lays bare the ethically questionable practices that fueled the company's transformation into one of Silicon Valley's most famous exports. And they say the leak spans a five-year period where Uber was run by its co-founder Travis Kalanick, who tried to force the cab-hailing service into cities around the world, even if that meant breaking or breaching laws and taxi regulations. And during the fierce global backlash, the data shows how Uber tried to shore up support by discreetly courting prime ministers, presidents, billionaires, oligarchs, and media barons. And they say leaked messages suggest Uber executives were at the same time under no illusions about the company's law-breaking, with one executive joking that they had become pirates and another one conceding, "We're just fucking illegal." So, I mean, again, they're just straight up saying it. There's no like conspiracy here or anything like that. The executives themselves are saying, we're just fucking illegal. So, I mean, absolutely wild here. But they say on Monday, Mark McGann, Uber's former chief lobbyist for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, came forward to identify himself as the source of the leaked data. And he said, "It is my duty to speak up and help governments and parliamentarians right some fundamental wrongs. And morally, I had no choice in the matter." So, some more details on some of their behind-the-scenes business practices here. They say, embrace the chaos. The leaked documents pull back the curtains on the methods Uber used to lay the foundations for its empire. One of the world's largest work platforms, Uber is now a $43 billion company, making approximately 19 million journeys a day. And also just keep in mind that this is specifically centered around Uber, but this could also be applied to many other gig economy companies and corporations like Lyft or DoorDash or Postmates, etc. This is basically how the gig economy is functioning right now. But they continue saying the files cover Uber's operations across 40 countries during a period in which the company became a global behemoth, bulldozing its cab-hailing service into many of the cities which it still operates today. And from Moscow to Johannesburg, bankrolled with unprecedented venture capital funding, Uber heavily subsidized journeys, seducing drivers and passengers onto the app with incentives and pricing models that would not be sustainable. So this is how they really undercut a lot of taxi unions and taxi groups around the world, is basically by just using massive influxes of capital from investors and using that to temporarily subsidize lower prices for consumers, as well as higher pay for drivers. And then once they've pushed out these other taxi drivers, once they've successfully consolidated a huge portion of the market, then they start to realize, oh, our business is just straight up not profitable because we're relying on capital injections and investors to keep propping up this subsidization of our lower prices and higher pay for workers. And basically, I mean, it's completely collapsing at this point. I mean, if they didn't have that continued influx of that capital investment, they wouldn't be a profitable business. I mean, straight up. But they continue saying it enlisted the backing of powerful figures in places such as Russia, Italy, and Germany by offering them prized financial stakes in the startup and turning them into strategic investors. So going after billionaires, oligarchs, public officials, etc., to try to basically rope them into their stock price so that they would have a vested interest in perpetually funding this company and, again, subsidizing their exploitation of their workers. But they continue saying, and in a bid to shape policies, it paid prominent academics hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce research that supported the company's claims about the benefits of its economic model. So again, on top of all of these other layers, literally bribing academics to do their corporate propaganda for them. But they say Kalanick, the CEO or former CEO and co-founder, appeared to put that ethos into practice in January 2016 when Uber's attempts to upend markets in Europe led to angry protests in Belgium, Spain, Italy, and France from taxi drivers who feared for their livelihoods. So this is where they put them in like direct risk of violence for their drivers. But they say amid taxi strikes and riots in Paris, Kalanick ordered French executives to retaliate by encouraging Uber drivers to stage a counter-protest with mass civil disobedience. So using their workers as basically just, not even cogs in the machine, but, adding fuel to the fire of what was, somewhat valid protests coming from these taxi drivers here who were being displaced by this corporation. But they say warned that doing so risked putting Uber drivers at risk of attacks from extreme right-wing thugs who had infiltrated the taxi protests and were spoiling for a fight. Kalanick appeared to urge his team to press ahead regardless, saying, "I think it's worth it." He said, "Violence guarantees success, and these guys must be resisted." No, agreed that right place and time ought to be thought out. So he's literally saying violence guarantees success. He's talking about violence being wielded either by or towards his own fucking workers here. But they say the decision to send Uber drivers into potentially volatile protests despite the risks was consistent with what one senior former executive told The Guardian was a strategy of weaponizing drivers and exploiting violence against them to keep the controversy burning. And it was a playbook that leaked emails suggested was repeated in Italy, Belgium, Spain, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. So this is, again, a massive global operation. But they give more details here on what they're calling the kill switch, which is basically one of the methods that Uber has been deploying to hide information and data and evidence from investigators and regulatory authorities around the world. But they say one senior executive wrote in an email saying, "We are not legal in many countries. We should avoid making antagonistic statements," commenting on the tactics the company was prepared to deploy to avoid enforcement. Another executive wrote, "We have officially become pirates." So again, they know exactly what the fuck they're doing, and they know that it's fully illegal in plenty of countries around the world. But they say Nayari, sorry if I'm butchering this name, but Nayari Hordejan, Uber's head of global communications, put it even more bluntly in a message to a colleague in 2014 amid efforts to shut the company down in Thailand and India, saying, quote, "Sometimes we have problems because, well, we're just fucking illegal." So again, that same quote from up ahead. But we're just fucking illegal. I mean, come on, how can you get more, in your face than this? But they say across the world, police, transport officials, and regulatory agencies sought to clamp down on Uber. And in some cities, officials downloaded the app and hailed rides so that they could crack down on unlicensed taxi journeys, fining Uber drivers and impounding their cars. I think that's kind of fucked up. I don't think you should be punishing the average people who are just trying to get by in their day-to-day lives. But they say Uber offices in dozens of countries were repeatedly raided by authorities. That I think is 100% justified. But they say against this backdrop, Uber developed a sophisticated method to thwart law enforcement. One was known internally as the kill switch. When an Uber office was raided, executives at the company frantically sent out instructions to IT staff to cut off access to the company's main data systems, preventing authorities from gathering evidence. So, I mean, listen, from top to bottom, none of this should be a surprise. We've seen exactly what these type of gig companies are willing to do in order to continue this racket this exploitation racket that they are continuing right now. But I mean, we had this story that came out from, I guess, 2 years ago now at this point, Jesus Christ, from 2020, which I also covered on this channel. It was one of the first videos that I covered on this, but it was centered around Proposition 22 in California, where basically these companies, Uber and Lyft, spent hundreds of millions of dollars, okay, literally almost $300 million on this single ballot proposition that was being put forward, which basically, because it was successfully passed due to their propaganda and lobbying efforts, basically forced these employees, or what should be considered employees for Uber and Lyft, to continue to be classified as independent contractors. And the consequences of that are pretty obvious. I mean, if you are an independent contractor, basically that allows Uber and Lyft to skirt around a lot of labor laws and protections that you would otherwise have in place, things like minimum wage or paid sick leave, or a whole host of other things like mandatory benefits and actual protections for workers that are put in place for people who are classified as employees. But they successfully managed to get this Prop 22 passed and are continuing, obviously, to operate with drivers as independent contractors, continuing to allow them to engage in this rampant exploitation. But I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's good that we have these leaked documents coming out, because hopefully now there will be more data, information, or evidence that could be used against Uber, as well as other gig economy corporations as well, that could take them down. Because listen, they're not providing anything of substance, okay? Again, basically their entire business model was based on the premise that they were going to get massive influxes of capital investment that they could use to temporarily subsidize having lower costs for consumers than they would get at competitor taxi services, as well as paying drivers more than would be sustainable under their business model. And at the end of the day, I mean, their business model is basically just exploiting their workers, skirting around regulations, skirting around labor laws, and again, as they pointed out in that article that we just read through, bribing government officials, lobbying them behind the scenes, as well as making financial ties to politicians, to oligarchs, to billionaires, and other shady groups around the world. So, I mean, this is what Uber is, and this is what the future of the gig economy is here in the United States. I mean, we have massive portions of our population that are working within the gig economy, and this is the type of shit that they are being subjected to. So, you know, it's absolutely horrible, obviously, but at the same time, really shouldn't be that surprising.